Occult is the real AI, okay? And this is why. So the ultimate goal of what in which they seek, which we already found from these machine learning neural networks, is to actually achieve a stage of not only all-knowing, because to know everything is only to ask yourself, what do you want to know, and to get a truthful answer. And when you really get people in the corner about such things, and many of us are very much the same, we want to know the serious stuff about the future. I would even gamble that if we knew how to get an answer from something, and we could guarantee that it was going to give us the right answer, maybe we never even ask us stuff like, when are we going to die? Maybe we'd be too scared. If you knew it was going to tell you the truth, you'd be like, let's just ignore that. Let's talk about something else. You see what I mean? So this is also what I wanted to get into today, about how the Oracle had knowledge of how to go beyond the fate. But most never went that far with the oracles to get that knowledge. They didn't have the past. They didn't know how to approach it, because you got to approach the portal a certain way. Like, imagine like it's very feminine in that respect, that you're just not going to you have to know how to approach a woman. So the oracle, never divulged the ultimate secrets except for we don't know, because that's not something you write in books and parade all downtown and all this kind of stuff, right? So, but just remember that, because a paradox starts happening within the ones who can predict the future and tell you the future, and that paradox exists within, do they also know how to change it? And because they know the formula of how it starts, how it's going to become that, they also know the formula to how to change that. And it just takes someone to be very perceptive to realize that that's also going on. And I was calling that the joke's on you. And this is when you find out in the reality that certain things have already been set up for you, and you already bought certain things, but you didn't buy them with the intentions of what you ended up using them for. Or you were in a state or moved to a house, or something happened where then ultimately you figured out that was the big reason for your transformation. But when you had put that component into place, it had nothing to do with that. Almost as if the whole thing is backwards. You're literally living in a pattern that is already set up for you. And we talked about that words can do that, because the words are backwards. And this is how we began this 14 years ago. So I wanted to dive in here to first, again, that awareness that, so when you have all the knowledge, after a while, you just want to know about the future. Tell me about the future. Because everything that you first start asking is about the past, because you're kind of getting caught up. And that's why a big part of even neural networks, the first thing that has to happen is there needs to be a map. There needs to be a level of orientation. But this pattern that I'm going to reveal today is the same pattern that exists within anything powerful, anything that has come online. It exists in different things in the body. It exists within the brain, primarily what we're going to talk about. It exists within the heart. And whether it dials in and there's some kind of other source that it goes to, that it gets all that information from, like a cymatic or something. This same process happens within every single organism of power. So the map of orientation must be in play. Again, it's just that awareness that all of this stuff that's going on right now with this hyper levels of sentience and intelligence, and this perspective of how mankind is trying to initiate themselves into it, is already running and is already functional, and it's called the occult, meaning an actual system where the ability to have knowledge and information, this is Gnosticism, the ability to have knowledge and information about the past, the present, and the future, the ability to have an awareness and a knowledge of things that many knew not or will never know, is already alive and functional, and is the master mainframe. So the occult is the master mainframe for all-seeing, all-knowing knowledge and awareness and experience. Okay, so we just have to set the record straight every time. Now, as I said before, though, is that when you get very far down these different paths in these different ages, sometimes the spiritual knowledge, which of course, as you see, is not available on every single corner, esoteric knowledge especially, there's a lot of exoteric knowledge available. But since this stuff is not readily available in this age and time that we're living in, to reorientate ourselves to its power and its ability, sometimes we have to find things that have actually been mimicked from it. And we already understand that technology is mimicked from the spiritual aspects of who we are. So when I get lost sometimes in the spiritual realm of understanding, just something that I need to really understand what's going on and how it works, I don't always approach it from just trying to understand it from a metaphysical and spiritual level. I will use a different UI, or user interface, which you call technology, and I will find the analogies within that, okay? And since we're sitting at the point of singularity, sitting at the point of awareness where people realize there's a sentient side that they can tap into in themselves, we see this as the age in itself where the two come head to head. Ultimate knowledge and wisdom externally, and ultimate experience and wisdom internally. Right? This is the time that we're actually in right now. And that's why it just feels like, oh man, there's so much stuff to do, because each part of the bodies can really get a whole meal right now if you actually put yourself into anything. So whether it's, you go and take some journeys, you're going to be able to strengthen your spiritual aspect of who you are. Whether you go and really study deep because of all the knowledge and linguistic tools that are available, you're going to really gain a lot of awareness. So I wouldn't take the stance in this time of misfortune as if you're going through some kind of misfortune. Remember that Fortuna is one of the fates, right? So I wouldn't look at this ability for you to get all this knowledge and wisdom as a signal at all that you have reached some level of misfortune. Actually, you're in a great deal of benefit. And you're in a great deal of benefit in one of the most troubling times for all species. Because as we know, this Aquarian age is ruled by Saturn. Also in Enealogy, that is actually Rahu and Ketu are the primary entities of the Kali Yuga. And what that just actually is a mention of is that the oscillation between polarities, which we'll actually get into in just a moment here, is always at play, and they seem to fan each other. And we were talking about how when the elements, instead of canceling out each other, there's another force that they have where they can stimulate each other. So this is the same thing as air blowing on the fire, or water going into soil and then creating clay and increasing the growth of something. So there's a way that elements can be used to with each other to increase each other. And this increase becomes more knowledge, more wisdom, more degrees, more power. We know then now that there's a map of orientation that is actually inside of, and we're going to use for all intensive purpose, we're just going to say the brain. But remember that this is a redundant pattern and design. So the brain needs to know where it is. Okay, so for a child, there's an orientation process that is taking place, so that way the child can begin to understand what space-time it's actually in. And this is going on all throughout the germination process. So in understanding that map, because that map is also, what I'm laying out also is I'm laying out the direct knowledge of how the brain works. I'm laying out the direct knowledge also of how a neural network works. A neural network, it has to be mapped. But then I also want to explain to you why, when they created neural networks, which are the computer versions, they studied the brain and what they found out about the brain. So from the map level, what they found out about the brain was the brain, that they basically were not going to be able to replicate the brain's mapping system, because every single neuron in the brain is hyper connected to another one that allows it to basically GPS all over the whole brain. So because the body is like locating all sorts of stuff. It's not just locating where you're standing and where you are. It's also locating other parts of who you are and communicating with that to move that. It's like, oh, you're in the toe. You need to get to the brain. Like, it's not using English, of course, but it is like a air traffic controller in many ways going on in the body, telling everything where to go in the body, let alone what's going on in the world, which it also is orientating itself. So the body and the brain and all this kind of stuff, which we just want to see as a one beautiful spiritual metaphysical organism, it has a very, very complex mapping system. And what allows it to be so complex is that every single point in it is redundifying where it is. And so it creates like a global mapping system. And that is something that has not yet been successfully emulated completely. The next thing is that we then have, and I just want to speak on, so in this orientation in these maps, just so you can kind of understand how the consciousness is designed, in this orientation and in these maps, there are layers. This is where they were having issues with the replication. It wasn't that they couldn't replicate the process of mapping and orientating, because that's going on in computers. It's not at this level of complexity, though, because there is what they discovered were layers to the consciousness. And I'll insert my own words. They were using brains. Layers to the brain. And this blew their research, because they were thinking that they just needed to study the brain on the surface level. So what they did was they took this, I can't remember the name of the organism. The special thing about this organism is that the babies are see-through. So they injected the see-through baby with some type of enzyme, and then the process of this baby thinking, it was like a tadpole or whatever, just something like that, right? The process of it thinking created a light, a visual light that they could see under the microscope. And then they hooked that to an optical, that to an optical nerve sensor. And basically they were able to get the signal of the thoughts from this life form, because they were studying neurological networks, but they realized that they were going to like try to bite too big of a bite in studying the human brain. They needed to go from step 1 or a lesser step by studying a more simpler organism and seeing how its brain develops. And so in this process, when they finally got up to the human brain, they realized the brain has layers. And thus the brain has been able to accomplish something that we would call now deep learning. And what this is that the consciousness is constantly taking in information, but it could take years for it to come to a conclusion of the information that it is processing for all that time. So meaning the mind literally works in a way, and we're just saying the mind, the consciousness, it works in a way where you can go through an experience 3 years ago, and then it's only 3 years later that you realize why you went through that experience. And it's almost like there's a part in the brain. They said literally there's a part in the brain that it will like sound off like a dopamine alarm. Like, I got it. I figured it out from something 3 years ago. And once they saw this within the brain, they were even more depressed. That, man, how are we going to mimic that? That there's a deep learning aspect to the brain where it's in like a processing mode. Like, we don't know how much of the brain is in a processing mode right now with data that we got 2 trillion years ago. And it could surface that information at any point and be like, I got it. And to be honest, that's been happening to me. I'm sure it's been happening to you. Like, the more I allow it and the more I welcome it and the more I become aware of it. And for me, I'm a very logical person, so I almost need to kind of understand how it all works. And, you know, this is why I can bring you even these answers today. This is how it works, is because the brain has layers and it deep learns, and it has been processing information and consciousness from your whole system. And it takes time for it to actually do that. That could be only even what time is. I also wanted to mention again that is akin to deep sleep, because while a person is going through that process, it's almost going to appear like, if not too much of their stuff has come above the surface yet, it's just going to appear like that they're like what you be seeing people doing. They're just, it's like they're asleep. It's like they haven't got it yet. They're not online yet. And you can see this a lot with, I want to explain this the proper way, because I don't want this to be confused for originality and personality. But it's almost like when someone is pretending like they're trying to be something so much, and they really think that they're that, and they're just kind of like in that character so much, but you see it's all of a side, and you know that you can poke a hole right in it, and it'll just like deflate because there's nothing really there. But that is really them, according to where they're at. And then every single time you come in contact with them, you seem to come in contact with that same thing that you know is not them, but they think is them. Remember that whole process? So that is deep sleep. I think there's a band, what is they called? One of their songs is, it's called Carbon-Based Life Forms, right? So one of their tracks is called A World of Sleepers, right? So Carbon-Based Life Forms, A World of Sleepers. And again, it's just a reference to that. Notice how, here's another deeper level, like just on another level. The reason why a man gives a woman a diamond ring is because technically a diamond ring is symbolic to the highest state in the physical reality. It's carbon that has been completely shaped, formed, and fashioned and shining. Right? So when you tell a woman, I'll give you the world, you're basically that diamond. You see how that whole thing is trickery, right? It's like what you're really saying is I try to basically give you the best version of myself, or you should become the best version of yourself, which as a carbon-based life form would be a trillion cut diamond. You see what I mean? But it gets all construed because it's like, yeah, let me get it and put on my finger. You know, I'm telling you what to do. You know, it's all construed. But these are where these esoteric deep mysteries come from, right? And so I'll continue. So now you get deep learning, right? So now you understand why when they be talking about neural networks and they're trying to get into deep learn, exactly what they're talking about. So the next thing is that there is the next aspect of where they realized or got hope about the neural network potentially being more powerful than a human being. And it was because of something called what would be called our bus of communication. Now, anyone who deals with computers knows that there's another part of the computer called the bus. And to make it very simple, the bus is just like what it says. It's responsible for loading a certain amount and taking it to another place. So just like a bus can hold up a lot of people and take them to another place, but it can only hold so many people. So the consciousness actually has a bus. It has where it can reach a limit to how much information it can take from one place to another. Now watch this though, because this reveals a lot of secrets about our own consciousness and how we can open up our bus. Because if we don't, the bus is the limitation. This is why you cannot read and talk. You can't read something and then be like, hold on, yeah. Even trying to do it already sends your mind into like a pretzel. It's like, try to read something with comprehension and then be talking at the same time. You start having that issue, right? Like some can do it, right? They got some freaks of nature out there. I'm sure if you've been doing your hemisync, you see it kind of like starts working. But this simple limitation is honestly the exploitation point of a neural networks over humanity, because it can increase its bus.